All right, last but not least, the 731 Runnymede item, which is number, what's the number of it, Jennifer? Clerk? 2615. So I guess we would start then with questions of staff from Francis, Councillor Nunziata.
I'm the only outside councillor
You
that's
are.
here. So question to Joe Caselli. So based on the report, $17 square foot is fair market value, correct?
Yes, we believe that to be so.
So, and for the first month of the lease, we're making an additional payment of $26,184.25. So basically, in the first month of the lease, we will be paying $34 square foot when fair market value is 17 square foot.
The reasoning
We're
behind
paying an
that,
additional month's rent.
yes, the reasoning behind that is the landlord had indicated to us that we've been in negotiations with him for over a year, and that he should be somewhat compensated for that lengthy negotiation.
So, and as you mentioned, you've been negotiating for over a year, and the recommendation that came forward in community development is to negotiate a lease, and if not, look at alternate sites. Now, being that the landlord is was very difficult in the past year, playing mind games with the city, why would we have to give him an extra month's rent?
I'll just say it was part of the negotiation. In order for us to come forward with a transaction to committee to consider, we had to go that, I'll call it the extra mile to get him to sign an offer to the city.
So we go the extra mile and pay thousands of dollars extra just so we can satisfy a landlord that, in my opinion, is a slum landlord?
Well, in terms of the negotiation, I would say it was lengthier than what might be normal. It wasn't just the landlord's doing, the city had some part in that also.
So when we had the community public meetings that we've had over a year ago, we communicated to the public, and so we actually misled the public that this would be a temporary shelter. So why are we negotiating, and it was always a lease for 5 plus 5, 10-year lease. So why is it that you're presenting today 10 plus 5? When we communicated to the public that it was a temporary shelter and it would only be 5 plus 5.
Because for the landlord to agree to the $17 a square foot, he indicated that he would only sign a 10-year lease. We also considered that we were putting considerable capital into the building, and through discussions with other city staff, we looked at how much our investment was going to be and the fact that we would most likely exercise that second option anyway.
So we're willing as a city to make deals with landlords and pay thousands of dollars extra so we can get into a warehouse for a shelter that's not appropriate, and that we would, just to please a landlord, and not thinking about the thousands of dollars and millions of dollars it's going to cost the taxpayers.
Well, if you look at that 1 month's payment over a 10-year term, it's not that significant, really.
Oh, you don't think that's significant?
Not 1 month out of 10 years, no.
Well, what about the 5 extra years that we misled the public on? This was originally a temporary shelter. Now it's 15 years. That's misleading the public.
It's 10 years with 2 options to renew.
Yeah, but that's not the way it was communicated to the public from the public meetings.
And when we're going through negotiations, you never know exactly how those negotiations may turn out. What I was attempting to do was to bring the best possible offer I could to committee and council to consider. And if you feel that I haven't, I'll say, negotiated hard enough, you can either turn me back to the landlord or just say, look for something else. But before you today is a signed lease by the landlord.
So among the terms and conditions, that the tenant would be responsible for the landlord, for the cost to repair and maintain the premises, so it's a plus a 10% administrative fee. Is this typical of a lease that we're paying a landlord 10% over?
It's a 10% management fee.
Yeah,
Yes,
management fee.
That's typical.
That's
To
typical.
cover operating costs, the landlord usually charges a management fee.
So this is the way we make deals.
That's how the marketplace
Yeah.
works with respect to leases.
That's it for my questions. I'll speak.
It is recommended that the site be leased until the George Street Revitalization project is completed. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
The recommendation is that this site be leased until the George Street Revitalization project is completed. Is that correct?
Through the mayor, what council approved was that this be set up as an emergency shelter with an initial occupancy of 50. There was no limitation in terms of it ending once the revitalization was over, but that is something we would consider and reevaluate at the time.
Yeah, well, in the summary on page 1 of the report, that clearly states that. Is a follow-up to Councillor Nunciara's questions with regards to community consultation. Actually, I was part of the panel together with Councillor Doucet and Councillor Nunciara at two massive public meetings where the public was assured by city staff that the negotiating lease was going to be for 5 years. So in terms of principle, in terms of being open and transparent to our local communities where members of council were responsible for it, I personally took you or whatever you said at face value. So I'm just wondering at this point, why do we come with these different options? What does it mean when you have 2 or 3 or 500 people before you, and we are so clear with those statements, and all of a sudden something else coming up? So I'm just wondering, do you have an explanation for that?
Through the chair to the councillor, back to your first question. In terms of the George Street revitalization, this shelter was tied to the George Street revitalization, which the earliest date that that would open would be 2025. So that would be a minimum of 8 years with some flexibility there depending on construction time and when that would actually open.
And with regards to the...
So further to your second question, then the 5 years would not get to the 2025 or until George Street opened. And that was the reason for the length of the lease, to be able to accommodate the construction period of George Street.
So the statements by staff literally contradicts exactly what you're saying, because at that point, it was well known when the St. George revitalization was going to be completed and what city staff was looking for in terms of a new lease is a little bit different. So I'm just trying to understand as why two different messages were sent out, which is not clear, for the community, not fair.
So through the chair, I can't speak to the 5-year piece. The George Street revitalization has always moved into the mid-2020s on that planning phase, so I do not know the reference to the original 5-year lease.
Will you need a shelter after 10 years after the completion of the George Street?
The intention is to close this shelter location once the George Street, the new site opens. And we're hoping that that would be in 2025. But there would be, with construction, there could be some flexibility there in the opening time.
So what's the purpose of having the option of renewals?
I'm sorry, I didn't
Through the
understand.
chair, the options to renew beyond the 10 years, is that what you're referencing? At that point, it would just be an option, and there might be other city purposes that you might want to use that building for at that time. So we felt there was no harm in actually having the options in case there's another use that we might be able to use that particular building for.
Thank you.
Okay. Questions by Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, so Councillor Nunziata said this was originally a temporary shelter, is this correct?
That is correct.
No, so do you still deem it to be a temporary shelter?
That is correct.
So, okay, so it's still a temporary shelter, and so how long is the first lease for?
It's for a period of 10 years.
So that's till 2028?
It starts June 1st, 2018, so
So June 1st, 2028 with an extension?
with 2 options to renew for an additional 5 years each. So that's our option.
So that's what you deem as temporary?
No, basically what I was trying to do is negotiate the best possible terms for the city to use it either for a shelter or for other city purposes. The options don't cost us anything.
Right, but you're indicating to the community that that something that could go for a potential 20 years, that no longer looks like temporary, that looks like permanent.
Through the chair, the intention is to use this site as a shelter until the George Street site opens, and then to close it as a shelter. And it would be then the option of the city to use it for a different purpose or to not use it.
But this is an unusual arrangement, Mr. Chair, and also, so you must have some indication. We usually don't sort of decide that we've already got, unless we know what we're going to use it for, we don't normally enter into leases for some undefined, open arrangement, do we?
So, Mr. Mayor, given the fact that George Street, we haven't actually initiated that revitalization, we felt it's safer to err on the side of having options. As Mr. Raff just explained, the earliest George Street would be ready is 2025, so in the mid.
3 years. So you're
8
giving
years.
yourself a 3-year buffer. And I guess you would do that given the fact that we seldom get projects completed on time.
And through the chair, we're still trying to secure the funding to actually start the project.
So my second question is could we arrange the extensions to be year over year as opposed to 5 years?
We could go back to the landlord with a counteroffer, but to me, our ability to utilize the building for another 5 years, if we can negotiate a rate that's, I'll say, acceptable to the city or complementary to our needs, then, at least we have.
But it also constrains you as opposed to 1 year as opposed to 5 or nothing.
Frankly, we could go back after the 10 years and renegotiate each of the 5-year
And
periods.
just my other question, sorry, Mr. Chair, this is important because Councillor, it's very quick. Councillor Nunziata said to me that this particular location is not very well accessed by transit and is not therefore doesn't really serve the purpose very well for which it was meant. It's not great for a shelter because there's no transit around. Is that true?
Through the chair, no, the transit is adequate and the services in the area are adequate.
Okay.
All right. Sorry, we're not, you'll have a chance to speak in a moment, Councillor. Councillor McMahon?
So
Pardon
I'm
me?
just wondering how hard it is to find locations for shelters and to find another space for this. How hard would that be?
It has been very challenging. We've looked at hundreds of sites with city real estate, and we're continuing to look for additional sites.
And how long has it taken you to find this site?
I think it's been about 2 years.
Thank you.
Councillor Barlow?
So we are looking to replace shelters and open new shelters because of the George Street revitalization and because our capacity is at 94, 96, something like that?
Yeah, through the chair, our occupancy has been floating between 93 and 97%.
And this is even before the George Street revitalization relocation happening. So we have an issue right now. George Street is gonna make it worse, and we are in need of locations. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so you have a lease that gives you 10 years, so it gives you a 3-year buffer to 2028 with the option of extending or not.
That's correct.
And we put together a plan to assist the community and to help with the integration of this shelter in the neighborhood?
That's correct. For the last 12 months, there